Hello and welcome. For those who do not know me yet, my name is Esther de las Casas, and I am the communications lead here at Mentabacus. Now, as you may have noticed, Dan never seems to read his own pieces. There is always some excuse. And today's excuse is that he is down in the basement, looking for an old dictionary. Quite funny, because usually he is not exactly shy of words. So once again, I will read his latest bigger picture for you. It is called Trust, the Currency You Cannot Print, and its subtitle sets the tone. Twisted words are the Trojan horses of trust erosion, a kind of currency debasement 2.0. And when currencies lose their value, we learn the hard way that banknotes do not serve as lunch. Let us begin. This summer, our journey took us deep into the Bavarian Alps, to Berchtesgaden, a small town on Germany's southern border. At first sight, it looks like a picturesque holiday destination, framed by mountains and valleys. Yet for many centuries, Berchtesgaden was more than a quiet alpine settlement. It was an independent territory of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, a political order that once covered much of Central Europe. The empire was a patchwork of around 300 territories, an almost unimaginable mosaic of rulers, privileges, and jurisdictions. Initially, only 7 of these lands carried the privilege of electing the emperor. Among them, the Kingdom of Bohemia, with Prague as its capital. Most others were arranged in layers, with larger regions exercising oversight over smaller ones, forming a cascading web of authority. But there were also exceptions, territories that reported directly to the emperor himself. Some were free cities, others were ruled by bishops or abbots, where worldly and spiritual power were united in one hand. Berchtesgaden was one of these church states. Nestled between Salzburg, Bavaria, and Tyrol, it stood as an independent subject of the empire for more than 500 years. Its territory was tiny, only about 450 square kilometers. That is about the size of Andorra today, or just half the size of New York City. And its population? The best guess, drawn from church registers and tax records, never more than 10 or 11,000. A whole principality, no bigger than a mountain valley. Yet it survived for centuries inside the Holy Roman Empire. Why does this matter? Because such a tiny territory could not endure by military strength or economic might. Its survival rested on a more elusive but equally powerful resource: trust. Trust to govern its own affairs, trust to conduct its trade, and above all, trust to keep good faith with its stronger neighbors. And that trust could be minted into a kind of currency, not struck in metal, but written on paper, bills of exchange that carried Berchtesgaden's word far beyond its mountains. Berchtesgaden, as a small prince provostry, and later under Bavarian influence, did mint coins of its own, but only in small quantities and mostly low denominations. Its real wealth came instead from just one asset: salt. For centuries, salt was a vital commodity, as essential for preserving food as oil is for fueling our modern economy. Yet the demand for Berchtesgaden's salt arose largely beyond its borders, in markets and cities far away. The question was, how could trade be managed when a small alpine territory had only limited coinage and no power to enforce its use? Carrying around silver or gold was impractical and risky. The solution was a financial instrument already spreading across Europe: the Bill of Exchange, or in German, the Wechsel. The bills of exchange carried Berchtesgaden's reputation far beyond its valleys. These instruments were not invented here. They had first been pioneered in the great trading cities of Italy like Florence and Venice, before spreading across Europe as a standard tool of commerce. But even a small alpine territory like Berchtesgaden could make use of them. Once established, the Wechsel became the backbone of long-distance trade. Instead of settling every deal with heavy sacks of silver or gold, merchants turned to paper. They issued a written promise, an order that a trusted banker would pay the sum at a later date. This was the Wechsel, and its power came from the banker's reputation. Even more important, the promise could travel. A trader in Augsburg might pass it on to a partner in Venice, who could endorse it again in Florence, until finally it was cashed. And with every endorsement, another name was added. Each new signature bound another merchant's honor to the paper, creating a chain of promises, a net of guarantors stretched across Europe's markets. In this way, a single slip of paper carried more weight than a chest of coins, letting commerce flow across mountains and borders without a single piece of metal changing hands. The strength of the Wechsel lay entirely in trust. If an issuer failed to honor it, their reputation collapsed, and with it, their ability to participate in trade. In the worst case, they would be excluded from future exchanges. Everyone had skin in the game. A dishonored Wechsel could ruin not only a single deal, but a merchant's entire career. To make the sanction visible, the names of those who failed to serve their notes were often published, an early form of name and shame that warned others not to trade with them. As long as the promise was reliable, however, the paper itself circulated almost like money. A Wechsel issued in Berchtesgaden could be passed on in Augsburg, Venice, or beyond, used to settle debts or purchase other goods. This mechanism allowed Berchtesgaden to survive for centuries without a currency of its own, and without anything resembling a significant army. Its standing in Europe rested on what might be called a brokerage of trust. The written words on the Wechsel mattered. They were promises. If kept, they became as good as coins. If broken, they turned to dust. If Berchtesgaden once stood for the careful maintenance of trust through the Wechsel, it later became a stage for its violation. In the 1930s, the fascist regime's leadership established an almost second seat of government here, in the Berghof on the Obersalzberg. Above it, they built what came to be known as the Eagle's Nest. It was a mountaintop retreat perched high on a rocky summit, reached only by a tunnel and a brass-lined elevator carved into the mountain. The Berghof was more than a private home. It served as a personal retreat, and at the same time as a stage for receiving foreign leaders and staging propaganda. Its location, commanding views across the Alps, was meant to project dominance, permanence, and power. At times, the dictator spent as much time in Berchtesgaden as in Berlin, receiving foreign leaders and shaping his public image against the backdrop of the Alps. Today, exhibitions on the mountain document this history. Their focus is not only on military operations, but on propaganda, on how trust in words and images was deliberately manipulated. The regime mastered new form of storytelling, one that relied less on text and more on pictures. They understood that a picture says more than 1,000 words, and they exploited this truth with devastating effectiveness. Photographs at the Berghof show staged domestic settings, the leadership smiling with children, sitting with dogs, and one of the worst dictators in history portrayed as a caring father figure. The images seemed natural, but they were carefully orchestrated to disguise brutality as benevolence. At the Eagle's Nest, panoramic alpine views were used to project serenity, timelessness, and destiny. The higher the setting, the darker the reality it concealed. The effect was powerful. Words were bent through images, their meaning detached from reality. What looked like truth was theater. For audiences at the time, this mode of communication was startlingly modern. We may take visual manipulation for granted today, but in the 1930s, it was an innovation. Propaganda dressed as documentarism. Here in the very same place where trust once enabled survival through trade. Trust was debased through illusion. Berchtesgaden thus embodies both sides of the coin. The promise of trust kept, and the danger of trust betrayed. What the salt merchants of Berchtesgaden trusted was not paper or ink. It was the promise those marks stood for. The same mechanism powered the staged photographs on the Berghof terrace. People granted the image a presumption of truth. In both cases, meaning traveled as a kind of credit, honored or dishonored by those who issued it. That is why language is the oldest exchange system we have. Every word is a small promissory note. When I say contract, value, or justice, you accept it because you expect a stable meaning behind the sound. The conversation works only if those notes clear. This makes the health of language feel a lot like the health of money. Counterfeit currency does not just cheat one buyer. It poisons the market. Likewise, hollowed-out words still circulate, but they buy less and less understanding. Flood a public square with euphemisms, slogans, and strategic ambiguities, and you do not merely win an argument, you devalue the currency of thought. Trust leaves the system. Yet language must not be frozen. Trade adapted through the invention of the wechsel. Thought adapts through the invention of new terms. Flexibility is life. Distortion is rot. History's leaps forward. Movable type breaking monopolies on meaning. More issuers, more scrutiny, higher standards. And here lies a deeper danger. In authoritarian systems, top-level control of language cascades downward until it corrupts every level of society, right down to the individual. It reshapes not only what people can say, but what they dare to think. That is why we are well advised to analyze how at our own level we are exposed to falsified or twisted words, stripped of their original meaning, and how we ourselves may slip into using such debased vocabulary, sometimes knowingly. Each time we do, we pass along counterfeit notes. Which brings us back to today. In classrooms and town halls, on timelines and talk shows, our proximity to truth depends on whether our words still clear as promises. If certain terms are so brittle that people avoid them, discussion retreats. If they are so elastic that they mean anything, discussion dissolves. Either way, thinking shrinks. The task is simple to state and hard to practice. Keep language flexible enough to capture reality as it moves, and exacting enough to resist its manipulation. Berchtesgaden's lesson is not only about notes and images, it is about the ongoing maintenance of our shared semantic ledger. We audit it every time we ask. What do you mean? We stabilize it every time we answer plainly. And we default on it whenever we let words do the work of hiding rather than revealing the world. If language is the oldest exchange system, then free speech is its guardian. Words have to circulate freely to retain their purchasing power. Regulate them too tightly, you choke the flow. Let them be twisted without consequence and you erode their value. Either way, the common currency of meaning is lost. The way we speak is extremely intertwined with how we think, and how we think shapes how we feel, and vice versa. Meddling with language, therefore, is a bit like recomposing who we are. If this happens from the top down, we run the risk of becoming reprogrammed entities, following preloaded scripts that silently auto-install onto our systems of thinking and feeling. If you are more interested in the idea of what I call self-installing scripts, feel free to listen to the previous bigger picture episode, Beyond Netflix, Who's Writing Your Script? The hidden cost of regulating language is that it narrows the range of thought and thereby opens the door to manipulation, even when the intention is good, protecting dignity, avoiding harm. Over-regulation inhibits the free exchange of ideas. A regulated word is like a locked coin. Its value exists in theory, but it cannot be spent. And if words cannot be spent, ideas cannot be tested. But testing ideas, debating interpretations, and questioning metaphysical claims, wasn't that the very promise of the Enlightenment? The foundation of Western culture. Its very nucleus. Conversation is not just communication. It is collective cognition, thinking aloud together. We often do not know what we think until we try to say it. If every word risks being a misstep on a minefield, we censor ourselves before we speak, and our thinking shrinks in silence. That is why excessive attempts to tame language backfire. They do not only restrict what we say, they restrict what we can think. Literature has long understood this. In Faust 2, Goethe stages a scene where the emperor is desperate for money. His coffers are empty, the court is restless, and the empire's grandeur seems ready to collapse under the weight of debt. Into this crisis steps Mephistopheles, whispering a tempting solution: issue new paper money, supposedly backed by hidden treasures buried underground, riches that might be found someday. The trick works, at least for a while. People accept the promise as if it were reality. Debts are paid, festivities resume, and confidence returns, even though nothing real stands behind the notes. We met Goethe in the previous episode in Weimar, where the walls of his study still breathe with his reflections on human freedom. Here in Faust 2, he reminds us of the dangers when freedom is bought with illusions. His allegory is not only about the debasement of money, but also the debasement of meaning. Mephistopheles teaches the emperor how to mint confidence out of air, just as manipulative regimes mint words stripped of substance. Imagine a classroom setting. In one classroom, students openly debate terms. What do we mean by justice? By equality? By value? Wrestling with definitions sharpens their reasoning. In another classroom, the same students hesitate, knowing that the wrong word might bring consequences. The discussion flattens, curiosity ebbs, and education turns into ritual rather than discovery. The contrast is stark. In the first case, language is a living currency. In the second, it is monopoly money, useless for serious exchange. This is why it matters not only which terms we use, but how information is displayed. Simplified diagrams can help reveal hidden structures. They reduce accuracy but increase clarity. Assumptions and value systems are laid bare. A text may conceal them. A diagram exposes them. With tools like the Menabacus, such diagrams become a way to map and test hidden logic with unusual clarity. That honesty is what can make a diagram the opposite of propaganda. Yet, like images, diagrams too can be twisted, simplified not to clarify, but to manipulate. In this sense, diagrams are like the Wechsel of Berchtesgaden. They are promises of structure and meaning. Their worth lies in trust. Trust that they are offered in good faith, to be tested and debated, not imposed as final truth. And like any note of value, that trust must be earned and renewed. Like with Weimar in our previous episode, Berchtesgaden leaves us not with a clear lesson, but with a paradox, a tension that still asks to be resolved. For centuries, it thrived on trust. Its salt trade sustained by Wechsel that traveled far beyond its borders. Later, it became almost a symbol of violated trust, where carefully staged images were used to disguise reality. In this respect, few places embody so starkly both the promise and the peril of language. Standing at the eagle's nest today, with the wide alpine horizon stretching outward, one feels the urge to lift our gaze as well. We too need a bird's eye view to place language, trust, and power at the very center of our discussions. They are not side questions, but the ground on which all else rests. George Orwell put the warning in unforgettable words. Quote, "Do not you see that the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought? In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible, because there will be no words in which to express it." End of quote. Trust in currency, in words, in meaning itself, is the invisible foundation of freedom. Lose it, and we do not just lose money or language. We lose the ability to think. And with it, the possibility of a shared future. So that was today's bigger picture. And who knows, if Dan ever manages to find that dictionary, perhaps he will read the next one himself. But honestly, I would not bet on it. Before we close, let me leave you with two questions. When was the last time you noticed a twisting of language? Something that felt like a subtle manipulation of meaning? And when you did you speak up? Or did you stay silent and become complicit in the quiet debasement of truth? These are not easy questions, but they matter because trust in words, just like trust in currency, is only kept alive if we protect it. And last but not least, remember, as Dan always says, learning isn't a trend. Structure still works. Square, not hip. Visit us at mentabacus.com.
Every story needs structure. Every mind needs a map. Mentabacus. Squares, not hip.